let's get into this right from the get because I want to get Jimmy's take. And that is Mike Ekeler leaving Tennessee to go to a Big Ten school. Caleb brought up the point, and I think it's a very valid one as we look down the line. The Big Ten is, I think we would all agree, has a better television contract. Jimmy, would you agree with that?
Yes. More revenue. Yes.
More revenue. And I wonder how much this is one of those things that you don't talk about as often. You talk about great coaches with the X's and O's. You talk about the recruiting home base you have, but this could be a trend that Big Ten coaches are able to poach SEC coaches and perhaps even transfer portal players because of the significant amount of money that they'll have in a surplus over the SEC. How concerned do you think SEC fans should be about this and the fact they could eventually take a back seat to the Big Ten?
Well, I think it is a potential concern. Now, as far as like Mike Ekeler, I don't know if he's making a lot more money going to Nebraska than what he made at Tennessee. He had coached at Nebraska before. Did he like living in Nebraska? Did he like living in Lincoln more than Knoxville? He certainly seemed to enjoy living in Knoxville based on the things that he said right off the bat. So I don't know all the reasons. If it's strictly money, then yes, that is a concern. Ohio State was well publicized to have the best team money could buy, allegedly paying $20 million on their roster. Having said that, I'm not so sure that other teams in the SEC couldn't have paid that much as well. Maybe they just chose not to. Now, part of this equation is Ohio had great recruiting classes. They bring in a ton of players, but the ones they brought in were impactful, like the center, McLaughlin, who people don't talk about. He won the Remington Award. Caleb Downs at safety, an All-American. Quinshon Judkins, outstanding running back at Ole Miss. They brought in some really impactful transfers, and maybe they kept some people from leaving with our NIL deal. So I do think the fact that you have more money brings in the potential that you will have a better roster and perhaps be able to poach some coaches away. Now, Alabama lost 2 players to Ohio State. Why did Alabama lose them? I don't necessarily think it was NIL money. I think it's because Nick Saban retired. So there was an extenuating circumstance, at least with 2 players that Ohio State got from Alabama.
Jimmy, to your point about Ohio State, I understand what you're saying, but that was before the TV contract revenue came in because this was the first year of the new TV contract revenue. Mike Ekeler's contract did expire on Friday. Dave and I basically talked about yesterday. People say he's a special teams coordinator. People who say special teams is a third of the game are lying. It's actually like 1/10 of the game if you look at the plays in special teams versus offense and defense. But I guess where I'm going with this is, what about the flip side? How much of this do you think was a school like Nebraska or another Big Ten school doesn't have to crunch numbers, but a school like Tennessee was thinking, he doesn't coach that many valuable positions. We probably need to save money here and go for somebody cheaper and not up his contract.
Well, so I have to ask this question. What's Nebraska paying him? I mean, maybe you know and I don't. If it's the same amount of money, it's a head scratcher. Was he making $350,000 at Tennessee? Mm-hmm. If Nebraska bumped it to $500,000, $550,000, $600,000, you got a really good point. Now, the guy that's being promoted is already making about $350,000 that I think they're going to promote anyway, right? So go ahead.
Sorry. I think Mike Ekeler's salary was, I'm pulling it up now. It was $475 when he first got to Tennessee, but it was actually at $575 this past year.
Okay. All right. $575. Then again, I don't know what Nebraska's paying him. Are they going to, the person they hire and promote, there was basically in what they used to call quality control, he's making $350,000. So is he going to go to $575, or is he going to stay at $350 and Tennessee saves $200-something thousand? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll go back to that key word that I mentioned earlier. Potentially, this could lead to more schools from the Big Ten poaching coaches and getting players from the SEC.
Wow. Worst case scenario, you've got the NFL and then the Big Ten would be AAA. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but the SEC would be AA. Surely to goodness they'll do something where that won't happen. How long is the television contract that undercuts the SEC?
I don't know. I know that the Big Ten, as I recall, and look, my memory's not what it was, but I think they signed a 7-year deal. Okay. And the SEC signed didn't they sign like a 15-year deal? 10-year, at least a 10-year deal.
10-year deal.
10 years. And I remember kind of criticizing that. Why did you do it that long? That's like an athlete who has a chance to sign a 3-year deal and make $50 million a year instead of an 8-year deal or a 10-year deal. Sign the 3-year deal, then redo your contract and make even more money after 3 years. So I thought the SEC was a little bit short-sighted in having such a long contract that they signed with ESPN, ABC. So, but I do think, I don't know how much more money. I know it is more money, but here's the thing too, which should play in favor of the SEC. And look, I understand that college athletes are more mobile now. You're more willing to go from California to Florida, from Florida to Michigan. I get all that. But I also think that there's such outstanding recruiting in the Southeast that I think you can overcome some of the money advantages that the Big Ten has.
I tend to agree with. Go ahead, Caleb.
Jimmy, I would agree with you if there was a marginal difference in money between the Big Ten and the SEC. The difference isn't marginal. The Big Ten is getting $1 billion a year in TV revenue, and the SEC is getting $300 million a year. And the difference per team is roughly like $22 million. Oregon and but just to give you a rundown, Oregon and Washington agreed to join the Big Ten while taking less revenue from the TV payouts than the rest of the league. They're still bringing more than every SEC team. And I think it's like 12 million more for them. And so 22 million, we just talked, Ohio State just won a national championship and we called it the best team money could buy because they spent 20 million in NIL. Every Big Ten team now is about to have an Ohio State NIL budget more than the SEC, every SEC team on this TV revenue. And as you point out with the difference in contracts, the Big Ten is going to be able to renegotiate before the SEC can renegotiate.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing too. I think a lot of SEC teams could probably spend $20 million. It's what they choose to do. And there's going to be, it looks like, somewhat of a cap, right? On the revenue sharing. Aren't they talking 20 to 22 million is what they're looking at revenue sharing with the House settlement? So it's not like you can all of a sudden, if you're a Big Ten team, decide I'm going to pay $50 million for these players.
You realize what we're going to get back to, don't you? But
collusion?
No, somebody is going to spend their $20 million, and then the new NCAA violation is going to be money spent over that. We're going to be right back.
Luxury tax.
Yes, we're going to be right back where we were with the Chick-fil-A bags with Jeremy Pruitt.
Well,
I hope I'm wrong, but I could see that if somebody needs an advantage. Oh, I got $5 million sitting over here. This booster just is dying to give to somebody. But I don't understand how you would do a salary cap with people like me. And my collective was very, very small. It was just Jacob Warren. It was just Cooper Mays. But how you could tell somebody that they couldn't go out and get that on their own. Now, the money they get from the school, I get that, but that seems illegal to me.
What's illegal?
The fact that a young man can't go out and go on his own.
Did that person go? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying. That part's illegal. Yeah. I don't think you can put a cap on it necessarily. They will attempt to put a cap on it. The only way you can put a cap on it, which the NBA, the NFL, and the NHL has, is through collective bargaining. Collective bargaining typically would involve the student athletes becoming employees. But the student athletes at Tennessee that I talked to that were in the SEC Leadership Council, Jemai Mashak and Tamari Key, said they do not want to be employees of the university because their scholarship money gets taxed. So if your scholarship at Tennessee is $50,000, you're getting taxed 28% on $50,000. They don't want that. So they don't want to be employees.
And also, I mean, and just an interesting side to this, like even if they collectively bargain, I mean, we know this, NBA, NHL, MLB, NFL players, they can make whatever they want in endorsements on the side. I mean, heck, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but until his last 2 years with the Bulls, Michael Jordan was never one of the top 5 players in the NBA. He was making like $3 or $4 million a year, but it didn't matter because he was getting $1 billion from Nike. And like we know with the NIL, I mean, that's still endorsements. So Jimmy, where I come from on this is how that goes back to the Big Ten SEC contracts. Look, we know how much money schools solicit from donors to build whatever they need to build and do whatever they need to do. My argument is, yes, there may be a cap on what they can spend, but isn't it also true that, okay, well, if the schools now have $20 more million to spend on whatever they need to spend, that's $20 extra million that the donors have to just buy players through endorsement deals of some sort, rather than having to spend it on, endowing a business school or endowing a, new practice facility or something like that.
Yeah, but here's the other part of that. All right, let's say I'm a booster. I got $1 million. Am I going to give my $1 million to a collective, which keeps 10%, or am I going to give my $1 million straight to the athletic department, and then it's not only they don't take 10% out, but it's a tax write-off for me? So my point is, if there's a collective that's collecting $20 million, I don't think they're going to be collecting $20 million once the schools can directly pay the players, because most of the donations from the heavy hitters is going to go directly to the athletic department, not to the collective. That's my opinion going forward. So I think the collectives will be drastically reduced in the amount of money they can have for the, quote, outside endorsements, Caleb, that you're talking about.
Okay, so today's tough question is morphed a little bit, and I want to turn it into this. You guys think about it. It's gone all over the place. But the question I want to ask you both is, in 5 years, will we look at the Big Ten as being the preeminent conference like we've looked at the SEC for the past 20? Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones.
So given the revenue, Jimmy, let me ask you this. Will we look at the Big Ten as being the better conference at all by a long shot, or just maybe a little bit better? How do you see things shaking out? Because it's been all SEC for most of since I've known you.
Does the clock start right now? Because if you started it 2 years ago, I'm going to say Big Ten.
Right.
They got to jump Michigan, Ohio State. If the clock starts right now, I would bet you the SEC wins as many national championships as the Big Ten. And think about it. If Georgia had been in the playoff 2 years ago, I think they'd have beat Michigan. But they didn't get in because of a bizarre set of circumstances, with Texas beating Alabama, Alabama beating Georgia, etc. I thought Georgia was as good as anybody in the country. This past year, with Carson Beck, could Georgia beat Notre Dame? Probably. So I don't think the SEC, it's not like the Big Ten is just way, way better than the SEC, in my opinion. And I also think that Georgia wasn't as good as they had been. They were not as good as they had been in Kirby Smart's best years. Alabama certainly took a dip when Nick Saban left. But I think there are teams that will rise back to the occasion and be capable of winning a national championship. And so it's going to be good fortune. I mean, Georgia was unfortunate that they lost their quarterback. But if I had to bet over the next 5 years, I would bet you the SEC wins as many national championships as the Big Ten, which might be hard since it's 5 years and 2-2. And
Clemson's going to get one.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah, Clemson's going to get one.
Yeah, Brigham Young. Yeah. So, but and maybe it's 3-2 Big Ten, 3-2 SEC. I don't think there's going to be much difference in these conferences as far as winning national championships over the next 5 years. If you call it 6 years, I'm going to go 3-3.
All right, Caleb.
In 5 years, I'm with Jimmy. I think it'll be 50-50. I think the gap's going to really increase, though, if we go 10 years, particularly when that new Big Ten contract sets in after the NIL. Because I want to point this out, Jimmy, real quick. You are right. The difference between donating to a school versus endorsing a player, you can write off your donation to a school. I don't know, Dave, you might know, but I mean, technically, can't you write off an endorsement as a business expense to a certain degree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's that. So you can write off an endorsement as a business expense. And if it's not as much as to a school, let's just call it what it is, guys. The donors to all these schools across the country will just buy members of Congress to pass a tax law to let them write off things as endorsements because they control Congress.
Conspiracy, Caleb. I do think Jimmy's onto something, though. I think you get
it's a conspiracy to say big money runs our government.
Well, no, I think you get a bigger tax break as opposed to paying employees. I think you get a bigger, I'd have to look that up, but if you give it to a school or a charity, I think you get a bigger break than just a business expense.
Well, and not only that, remember, the collectives is taking 10% of that money. So if I'm donating to $1 million, I don't want 100,000 going to a collective. I want that going to the student athletes that I'm trying to support, right? So that's another part of this equation that I think. Now, here's the thing too about the endorsements. You don't have to have a collective to set up an endorsement, right?
Right.
You don't have to do that. You can go out on your own. You could go to a car dealership. You could go to a restaurant. You could go wherever and get that endorsement without the collective being involved to negotiate, right? But basically, I'm saying I think the collective's influence is going to be minimized a little bit with what's going on.
Well, that's what I mean, like which would still even further favor the Big Ten, because can't these donors then just say, I'm going to just endorse these players myself without the collective? Sure. And, I'll give Nico Amaliaba $2 million to ride on a plane and I'll have him endorse my plane.
Yeah.
I looked into that. He's actually more expensive than that just for a podcast.